I've been seeing a lot of people asking, how did Jinwoo take down the Cerberus for this week's episode of Soul Leveling? And I want to answer that question before I go any further, because one thing that some people have not realized is that this weapon in particular, that Jinwoo is attacking different enemies with, has special status effects that have been shown on screen here and there, but they haven't been fully clarified with actually what they fully do, and so it makes a lot of sense why a lot of anime-onlys might not be able to understand how something that's clearly so much more powerful than Jinwoo in this episode was able to be brought down to its knees and taken out by him. Jinwoo effectively has a very broken weapon and is hard carrying him at this moment, because if we had to look at his status and how strong he is as an individual in this episode alone, he's clearly not S rank status. In fact, I would say I'd put him in B rank, maybe even high B rank status at this point. He's nowhere near an S rank, level to be able to fight creatures like this that we see going on in this episode. And his weapon is basically super broken, because what it does is it causes paralysis, basically where people can't move, and it also causes bleed damage. And anyone that has played, let's say, a Souls game or any form of, game that has status effects like bleed or poison knows just how broken, damage over time effects really can be, because it adds up. Dot damage adds up, and eventually it's able to take down some of the strongest foes or bosses, because just duration and dot damage is just ridiculous. And in this case, Jinwoo, he's using bleed damage from his weapon to be able to kill this Cerberus. And I think that's what makes this very interesting, is that the mechanics of that is he's using a very broken weapon to bring down this creature, and if he did not have this weapon, it would not be possible for him to be able to beat said creature or other opponents so far that he has slain in these recent episodes. But with that being said, let's actually segue over into something that needs to be discussed before I go any further for Soul Leveling Episode 7, and that is the delay. Next week will be a recap episode of Soul Leveling on February 24th, and we're going to be having an episode titled 7.5. And for the most part, this is common practice. Anyone that has watched anime over the years, or years now, knows that there's always recap episodes that appear here and there for different shows, especially A1 related shows, like A1 Studios. They've always had recaps pop up and stuff, so it's not necessarily something uncommon or something that is strange, so to speak. Recap episodes always appear for different shows. It's not just a Soul Leveling problem. It's not an A1 studio problem. It's something that appears. But there is a few things to factor in, okay? So from what I can gather, there's not a lot of information, but from what I saw a few people saying, I don't know if this is true, correct me if I'm wrong, but apparently next week there's some form of sports event, and the reason for that is why Soul Leveling is going to be having a recap episode next week. So that makes a lot of sense, all things considered, if that is indeed the case, because I have known for anime to have a break or a delay or a recap episode because of some form of sports event. That's definitely a thing. Now, I don't know necessarily if that's true or not, but that is food for thought. But another thing I want to bring up is that recap episodes usually do mean some form of production issues. That's the truth. It usually does mean that, because it means that most likely the staff, hasn't finished working on the upcoming episodes, and so they need a little bit more time to be able to get those episodes out for everyone to see. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that Soul Leveling has production issues. I'm not saying that, and we haven't seen really any other confirmation to really confirm this, but if there is one thing we can go along with and know when it comes to A1 Studios as of late in the past year or so, is that most of their anime that they produce does look good, but there is a lot of production issues behind the scenes, or delays. We have seen, for instance, Nier get delayed, indefinitely for a good long period of time, and just only recently did it have its, latest episodes come out. So when you factor all of this in, it's yeah, it makes sense that, people would be worried that Soul Leveling is potentially going to be getting indefinitely delayed when you see a recap episode titled 7.5 coming out next week. I mean, we'll have to see as the weeks go on, but typically when we have seen these delays for these type of shows, especially A1 Picture-like shows, it has started to appear on episode 6 and 7 mark. We'll see. This could have been pre-planned, this whole 7.5 thing, but it is something to consider. A lot of people have been talking about it, and I wouldn't necessarily be concerned concerned yet. I would be concerned when episode 8 comes out, if there's any form of delays around then or episode 9, then it is time to start worrying for potential indefinite delays for Solo Leveling. Now, with that out of the way, let's actually get back to the episode. So, this episode of Solo Leveling, honestly, it's a tamer episode than last week, but it legitimately sets the tone up, or puts the story, on tracks and rails to know what Jinwoo is fighting for going forward. For instance, it's clear that he wants to get stronger. The whole point of the story, or at least, with the title, it's called Solo Leveling, is he's solo leveling, getting stronger, and eventually he's going to be able to be as strong as S-rank, hunters, and even stronger than them, somehow a level beyond them, and that's basically what kind of a goal has been set. But this episode kind of establishes a little bit more goals that's been going on and kind of been setting up behind the scenes, and that is that Jinwoo wants to help his mother. His mother is deathly ill, very sick, has some form of incurable disease that's kind of been already established in previous episodes, but, basically, he gets a chance to go to this dungeon that has a possibility of giving this elixir that can cure any disease. No matter what it is, it can cure, actually cure any disease. And so it makes sense why he would want to go after something like that. It's very lucrative. Even if, let's say, hypothetically, his mother wasn't sick, nobody in his family or anyone was sick, going after some form of elixir that can cure anything is definitely something I would want to go after, because you never know. When you're going into dungeons or fighting these weird creatures or whatever, you might encounter a status effect that just straight up might say just imminent death. Like, you're going to die in 24 hours, and there's no way to cure it. So having an elixir that could potentially cure that, seems like a really smart move to play. So, it makes sense why he would risk himself going into, like, an S-rank dungeon just to be able to obtain something. But, basically, the goal has been set that he wants to save his mother, beat the dungeon, to be able to get that elixir, give it to her, heal her, but on top of that, he wants to make money as well for they can have a good life. And then there's other things that are kind of being built up in this episode as well, that, guilds are going to be trying to recruit Jinwoo, trying to get him on their side, which makes a lot of sense, because there's only a limited amount of time, for him to be able to hide his true identity. As he eventually gets more and more dungeons complete, he gets stronger, he goes in different missions, etc. He's going to draw attention to himself. It's only a matter of time until people start to catch on that, he is not an E-rank hunter anymore. They're going to realize something else happened. He's going to like he had a double awakening and all that, so he can't hide it forever. And when that finally does happen, when that day does come, you're going to have, having guilds pressure him into joining them. They're like, hey, you need to join us, we can give you these billions of dollars, whatever. And it's very clear that at first glance it might be good, but they can give him some really awkward and awful contracts that he just might not, agree with at all. So this individual kind of coming to him and asking for, like, hey, could you join my guild, makes a lot of sense, because he's the only one at this current time that knows about Jinwoo's, overall abilities and what he's capable of. And him turning him down makes a lot of sense. It makes you wonder, though, will he reconsider in the future? But this is definitely some hidden plotline going on behind the scenes with everything else going on with the whole mother situation and him getting stronger. Now, let's talk about the art and animation for a second, okay? So, the spectacle of this Cerberus fight against him legitimately looks great. I don't think that this is the best sequence we have seen from the show thus far yet, but legitimately, it is a very beautiful, scene that showcases Jinwoo just getting he's just getting destroyed, honestly, in this fight. Like, he absolutely gets one-sided destroyed, and as I already said at the beginning of the video, he barely makes it out through this thanks to his broken status effect on his dagger. If it wasn't for that, he would have straight up died in this episode. Now, I do want to mention the blood for a second. I've been meaning to talk about this because, last week was a perfect segue to talk about it, but I really wanted to focus in on his emotion and mental state thanks to everything that happened with him killing humans for the first time in episode 6. There is a lot of violence and gore in this show. And I know there's shows out there that do show violence and gore, but I'm still astounded with how much this show does show. Because this isn't like the early 2000s and 90s anime anymore, to where they can have less restrictions on violence and all that. So, the fact that there is just so much violence, and like you get to see like his arm just truly messed up in some scenes, I really like that. I love how this show isn't really trying to censor, and I don't remember exactly panel by panel how this was like in the webcomic, but I do believe, at least in terms of comparison of the blood, it does seem very similar, and maybe even more in some areas. So I'm all for that. I'm glad to see that in terms of censorship, we're not getting much of that. Now, that's another thing. I guess this is a good way to talk about it. Now, censorship. obviously, you know, there isn't a lot of that going on with soul leveling, but there is an area that does need to be talked about that has not been in the show. And that is more heavy details on certain status effects and abilities and what Jinwoo is actually doing when he levels up. Because if there's one thing that's been cut, it's definitely that. And it's one of the reasons why people were confused about his dagger and stuff. Even if they've shown status effects and windows and stuff, it's so quick and it doesn't really explain that it can leave a lot of people lost and just wondering what's really going on. Now, to be fair, you can kind of take this as like, you know, it's more of a show don't tell situation, which is fine. You know, there's a lot of stories that do this, and I think they can do it very well. But in this case, Soul Leveling is an action-packed series, and it doesn't, you know, the way the show is, it doesn't want you to have your brain always on. It wants you to just enjoy the action fest. It wants you to enjoy the power fantasy, and that's about it. They don't want you to think too hard about everything going on. And there's nothing wrong with that. There is nothing wrong with a show or a story doing that. But at sometimes, it could be at the cost of the audience not knowing kind of fully what's going on. And they really take a step and think about like what's really going on in these certain scenes. So I do think that in terms of handling of the show, I wish that they kind of showed the status windows more, but you know, you can only do so much honestly, because it's very clear the intent and purpose what A1 Pictures is trying to do with Soul Leveling is just focus on the action, which makes a lot of sense. That's kind of, you know, what made it popular to begin with. So I think that in the end, if they had to sacrifice something, it makes sense they would sacrifice that. But yeah, overall, episode 7 of Soul Leveling is legitimately a great episode. I wouldn't say it's the best. I wouldn't say it's the worst, obviously. But I'm looking forward to what episode 8 is going to bring us, because there's probably going to be some high-quality content. But we're obviously going to have to wait for 2 weeks before it to come out, thanks to the overall delay next week. But I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much for watching. May all of you have a fantastic day or night wherever you live. Leave me a like on this video if you enjoyed it. And with that, Chibi out.